Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Njoku, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 4 waiver wire targets for the 2022 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about players at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, kicker, and team defensive positions. Some players benefiting from the fact that injuries occurred this past weekend, while others are benefiting from the breakout performances, which is going to help them vie for more opportunity in upcoming weeks. We'll talk about these players, I'll share statistics, and of course, we'll go over the reasons why you should be picking them up, adding them not only as roster depth, but players that could very easily make an immediate impact for your teams in Week 4. Now, before we begin today's video, I want to thank you guys for supporting the channel, as you typically do, with the like buttons down below, commenting, and of course, sharing the content. Be a friend, tell a friend. I know it's difficult to do so during the season, but I greatly appreciate it. For those of you who have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Of course, we are on our way, very close to getting to our goal of 70,000 subscribers. If you're able to help us get there, it's greatly appreciated. Again, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2022 season for the singular purpose of trying to help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. Much appreciated. Now, for those of you who are trying to continue to play fantasy football and perhaps don't have anybody competing in tonight's contest, be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. There's a link down in the description of the video. When you sign up today, making a first-time deposit using promo code Angie, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. It's a $10 deposit minimum, so if you're interested, check that out. Again, tonight we have the Dallas Cowboys taking on the New York Giants, and there are a boatload of higher or lower pick'ems that you can go ahead and participate in. Again, if you put together a 5-leg pick'em and pick higher or lower on given statistics and get them all correct, you can 20 times your overall money. If you're interested, check that out today. Again, as of this current moment in time, my favorite 3 pick'ems for tonight are as such. Noah Brown on the higher in terms of total receptions. Again, last week with Cooper Rush as his starting quarterback, was able to get 5 receptions. I'm expecting him to continue to be involved in the passing game. Sterling Shepard over 4.5 receptions. Again, as he continues to be a mainstay in this offense with Wanda Robinson injured, Kadarius Toney doubtful to play tonight, and Kenny Golladay pretty much being completely phased out. He's one of the primary receivers in this offense and is definitely going to get a lot of target share. Last week had himself 10 targets, 6 catches. I think he's able to eclipse this number. And finally, Richie James, he's been able to get 5 receptions in each of the last 2 weeks as well. Over 3 receptions seems like a pretty easy number for him. This should be a contest in which the Giants definitely have to pass the ball in order to move the ball down the field and find success, even though Daniel Jones hasn't been very successful on primetime TV. 0-8 in primetime in his career. I expect this to be a closer game than people anticipate. A lot of throwing from both sides. Should be a competitive one. All right, outside of that, be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code ANGEL today. If you're interested, check that out. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into our Week 4 running back waiver wire targets. Beginning with the first player I wanted to mention today, it is Khalil Herbert of the Chicago Bears. Now, unfortunately for many of us, we lost the services of one David Montgomery yesterday due to the fact that he went down with not only an ankle injury, but a knee injury. Khalil Herbert stepped in and had himself a great performance. And this isn't the first time that Khalil Herbert has stepped in and found success for this offense. You go back to last season when David Montgomery missed time with his 2021 injury, Khalil Herbert came in and had himself a great performance. Now, at this current moment in time, he's currently rostered on 49% of Yahoo leagues. That makes his availability pretty shy for a majority of us. But if in fact he's available, he's coming off of a week again, 20 total carries for 157 yards, a 7.85 yard per carry average, 2 rushing touchdowns. The fact that he has 29.9 total fantasy points just in 1 week, as crazy as it is, at this current moment in time, Khalil Herbert is the number 7 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format. Jamal Williams is number 6. Just putting that in perspective, already Khalil Herbert has more fantasy points than players like Derrick Henry, has more fantasy points than players like Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette. Guys that we anticipated to be top 12 talents, they're getting outscored by backup running backs who may be keeping the job henceforth. They play against the Giants this upcoming week. Should be a pretty good spot for Khalil Herbert. Moving on, let's talk about our number 2, Alexander Mattison. Speaking of more injuries, Dalvin Cook sustaining another shoulder injury with a dislocation, something that he dealt with a lot last season, had to battle through that and did miss a lot of time due to that injury. If this is going to be a reoccurring situation where he's going to miss 2 to 3 games with that shoulder injury, expect Alexander Mattison to be highly utilized within this offense. Unfortunately for Alexander Mattison, he does have to take on the Saints, the Bears, and the Dolphins. Those are relatively good defenses. I would say that the Bears is an incredible matchup, while the Dolphins and Saints matchups are unfavorable for him. Nonetheless, if he's available in your league and you are a Dalvin Cook manager, or even if you're not a Dalvin Cook manager and need a spot start for the next couple weeks, he's currently rostered in 55% of leagues. Go ahead and pick him up. Moving on, let's talk about our number 3, Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine had to come into the game mainly because Joe Mixon left and did not participate in the fourth quarter, was hobbled, had a sore ankle, according to Zach Taylor, the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. If in fact we're going to see Joe Mixon miss this upcoming week's game. And you may be wondering, why wouldn't he be able to recover by the time they play on Thursday night against the Miami Dolphins? It is a short week. In order for him to be fully healthy and participating, he's got to make a lot of progress in the upcoming days. I don't expect that to happen. I expect Samaje Perine to most likely be the starter or primary running back in that offense for the game against the Miami Dolphins. He's currently only being rostered in 6% of leagues. If you are a Joe Mixon manager, be sure to pick him up and make sure that you have his usage for this upcoming Thursday. Moving on to number 4, J.D. McKissic. In a full PPR scoring format, J.D. McKissic has solidified himself over the last couple weeks as a for sure flex start. The amount of receptions he's getting, the amount of utilization in terms of snaps. The guy was playing 53% of the snaps just this last week, outsnapped Antonio Gibson, and we know we're transitioning to a time in which Brian Robinson is eventually going to return. If in fact you are in need of a running back that could very easily fill in, have himself maybe 6 catches, 40 yards in a singular game, get himself 10 fantasy points in a full PPR scoring format, and maybe he just gets a couple touches here and there, falls into the end zone by luck. This is a running back only rostered in 26% of leagues that I believe you should be picking up if you are playing in a full PPR scoring format. Outside of that kind of a format, not too interested in J.D. McKissic because of his overall touches not really being there and his touchdown upside not as high as other backs. Moving on to Tyler Allgeier. Again, he's mainly just a handcuff at this point. He is going to get himself a good volume of touches for a handcuff option. But the main reason I wanted to bring him to the forefront is because he's only rostered in 15% of leagues. And what we saw from Cordero Patterson last season is that, again, he's a wide receiver playing the running back position. Eventually, there could be a situation where he goes down with an injury. Again, you have to make sure that you have handcuffs for your stud running backs. There's a reason why every single running back I've mentioned thus far are backups, because if in fact the starter goes down, you need to have that insurance policy available to you. Pick them up and play. Tyler Allgeier, they'll be taking on the Cleveland Browns this upcoming week. Could be a good matchup for them if in fact he continues to get his 8 to 10 rushing attempts per game. Could always fall into the end zone, have himself a breakout game here and there. Obviously, Cordero Patterson looks like he's going to maintain his starting position, but this is a handcuff option. The final handcuff option I wanted to mention is Craig Reynolds. The reason why I want to mention him is because at this moment, DeAndre Swift looks like he's going to miss the next 2 weeks due to the shoulder injury that he sustained. Going into week 3, he was obviously dealing with the ankle injury, but this shoulder injury is something that definitely bothered him last season. So if in fact Jamal Williams is going to be the primary back for this team for the next couple weeks, until their bye week in week 6, we're going to potentially expect to see Craig Reynolds be the number 2. And if in fact something is to happen to Jamal Williams, then by all means, Craig Reynolds, who has been the starter for this team going back to last year, who played extremely well when given opportunity, could very easily be a running back that we want to have on roster. For those of you who play in a deeper league, again, guys like Craig Reynolds, not rostered in any league, 0% on Yahoo at this current moment in time, but just wanted to mention him as a potential option. Let's move on to the wide receiver position, beginning with our number 1, Romeo Doubs. Doubs played 88.7% of the offensive snaps on Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which led to 8 targets, 8 catches, 73 receiving yards, a touchdown, and 17.3 fantasy points. Currently only rostered in 25% of leagues. We mentioned it in our must-start video last Friday, in which we expected a lot of the wide receivers for this Green Bay Packers team to not be available for them. Sammy Watkins went to the IR. Christian Watson was not going to play. There was also conversation of Randall Cobb not playing. He ended up playing, and so did Allen Lazard. But nonetheless, Romeo Doubs showed up and absolutely delivered as the number 1 receiving threat of this offense. Of course, Allen Lazard got himself his decent share of looks, and so did Robert Tonyan, but ultimately Romeo Doubs is the guy for the Green Bay Packers. And if you're associated with Aaron Rodgers, you're going to get the wide majority of targets. Expect fantasy value to be there at a plenty. By the time tomorrow rolls around, if we get an indication as to whether or not David Montgomery's injury is going to plague him for multiple weeks, I would say Romeo Doubs is the number 1 waiver wire option going into the week. Because if Khalil Herbert is only going to be starting for that team for only a couple weeks, 2 or 3, I'd rather have Doubs rest the season over any other option that we mentioned on today's episode. Moving on to Tyler Boyd. Now, the reason why we have to mention Tyler Boyd is because T. Higgins has sustained injuries in 2 of the first 3 weeks. Week 1 got a concussion. Week 3 seems like he also, got himself a concussion. But prior to that injury and having to leave the game in the second quarter, T. Higgins was fantastic. He was playing out of his mind. But Tyler Boyd stepped up, stepped in, had himself a receiving touchdown. He has done that in the 2 games in which, of course, T. Higgins has left early. As long as Tyler Boyd is associated as the number 2 receiving threat and steps up and makes those plays, Of course, he's going to have himself a lot of value. Currently rostered in 51% of leagues. We should be looking at this as someone that we want to have on roster, because if T. Higgins isn't going to be available this upcoming week, could be a pretty good matchup. Considering they play on Thursday, it's a shorter week for T. Higgins to make that return. Moving on to Russell Gage, had himself a fantastic performance. I mean, purely did. Had himself 13 targets and 12 catches. Caught himself a touchdown late in that game. And as of this current moment in time, if we're not going to see Julio Jones or Chris Godwin return in, the near future, the next couple weeks, outside of, Mike Evans, I think Russell Gage is at number 2. And if he's going to continue to play in that slot role against Kansas City, Sunday Night Football this upcoming week, should be a pretty good play. Currently only rostered in 42% of leagues. Should be addressed. Again, he had himself over 16 fantasy points, a fantastic performance, even more in a full PPR considering the 12 overall receptions. Moving on to Isaiah McKenzie. We anticipated Gabriel Davis to be hobbled to an extent, and we kind of saw that in terms of the target share and the amount of opportunity that was kind of sent in his direction. But Isaiah McKenzie, having played 50% of the offensive snaps, was able to garner 9 targets, 7 receptions, 76 receiving yards and receiving touchdowns, 17.7 fantasy points. Overall, if this offense is going to continue to be as pass heavy as they've shown, I mean, really, the fact that Devin Singletary had himself, 11 targets in that game, the amount of times that the Buffalo Bills had to throw the ball, considering their running game was just non-existent. If this is going to continue to be the case due to the fact that they're missing a lot of starting offensive linemen due to the injuries that have kind of rotated there, it seems like this is a pass-heavy offense. They have themselves a relatively favorable matchup this upcoming week, taking on the Baltimore Ravens secondary that have shown over the last couple weeks, whether it is Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, or even DeVante Parker, they're giving up a lot of yardage. Isaiah McKenzie is not a bad option. Moving on, Greg Dortch. Every single week, Greg Dortch proves himself once again, coming off of a game in which he played nearly 89% of the offensive snaps, 10 targets, 9 catches, 80 yards. In a full PPR scoring format, this guy is a must-start at that capacity. Only rostered in 17% of Yahoo leagues. Greg Dortch, get on the roster already, because we need you to go ahead and have yourself another great performance. This is 3 weeks in a row where he's been fantasy relevant. If you haven't already addressed him and you play in a shallower league where you don't have as many bench spots and you haven't been able to trust him and get him on roster, a lot of the leagues I play in, we've got a lot of bench spots, so we have to trade more often. You want to go ahead, pick up Greg Dortch going forward. Moving on to Zay Jones, our number 6. Zay Jones had himself a boatload of opportunity as well. I mean, mainly because the Jaguars really couldn't be stopped, whether it was Christian Kirk, whether it was Marvin Jones, and even Zay Jones. 11 targets, 10 catches, 85 yards and a touchdown, 19.5 fantasy points, playing 77% of the offensive snaps, a game in which they completely blew out the Los Angeles Chargers. This isn't the first time that Zay Jones has played well. We have seen a pattern of success already this season. There's a reason why they signed him as a free agent and brought him in. They knew he was going to make an immediate impact, and they've done exactly that. Currently only rostered in 10% of leagues. Another one of these players that we want on roster. Moving on to the second half of our wide receiver conversation, beginning with Sterling Shepard. He plays tonight, but I do anticipate that he's going to continue to see a high volume of targets. That is why I've involved him in my pick'em slip for tonight's game. In terms of higher on the reception count, 4.5. I think he could very easily go higher on that. 5 receptions should be very easy for him. Even if the depth of target isn't very much, he's going to continue to get that value and present himself as a great option. In week 4, they take on the Chicago Bears. I think it's a favorable enough matchup to get him involved and find fantasy value. Moving on to Joshua Palmer. If in fact we're in a situation where Keenan Allen once again is not participating, then Josh Palmer, could end up seeing himself more and more opportunity. 9 targets, 6 catches, 99 yards. Of course, had himself a big reception late in that game that pretty much piled on majority of those yards. But as long as you're getting nearly double-digit targets within one of the better offenses in the league, obviously did not look like one of those better offenses yesterday against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but as they get healthier, they'll figure that out. Rashawn Slater went down with a season-ending injury. Of course, Herbert's dealing with himself an injury. They're going to have to get the ball out of this young man's hands as quickly as possible. Joshua Palmer could be that answer until Keenan Allen returns. Moving on to DeVante Parker. As of this moment, we're expecting Mac Jones to miss a couple weeks here. Due to the fact that Mac Jones went down with that significant ankle injury, it seems to me that DeVante Parker may have potential with a Brian Hoyer, but I don't know if that's going to be the case, especially going up against the Green Bay Packers. I want to respect the fact that DeVante Parker is coming off of a huge week in which he had 156 receiving yards on 5 catches and 10 targets. That is an incredible performance, yet, with that all being mentioned, currently rostered in 25% of leagues, this may be a player that we want to kind of wait and see rather than pick up and play. So that's why he's sitting here a little bit lower on the wide receivers list. Moving on to KJ Osborn. As of the last 2 weeks, Justin Jefferson has been completely MIA, missing in action we have not seen any sort of production from Justin Jefferson, and maybe this presents an opportunity for another player like KJ Osborn to step up. Osborn and Adam Thielen were the only relevant wide receivers in that offense yesterday, so KJ Osborn only rostered in 6% of leagues. Besides being a handcuff to Jefferson and or Thielen, if something was to happen and they were going to miss time, he potentially has himself solo value upcoming for the future weeks. We have Josh Reynolds, who honestly, when you're talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of slowing down, Josh Reynolds picked up a lot of that work. 10 targets, 6 catches, 96 yards. Josh Reynolds played 80% of the offensive snaps. He's continuing to get more and more involvement. And we already know that him and Jared Goff, considering their days back with the LA Rams, have a synergy, have a built-in rapport that they're continuing to build upon. Currently rostered in 0% of Yahoo leagues. Not a bad option there. The final player I wanted to mention is Mack Hollins. Mack Hollins has literally played 87% of the offensive snaps minimum every single game this season. Last week, he had 10 targets, 8 catches, 158 yards, and a touchdown. 25.9 fantasy points. And we think to ourselves, isn't that the numbers we're supposed to see from Davante Adams? And I would answer yes. Yet, that is not the case. Mack Hollins is only being rostered in 2% of leagues. If, in fact, he continues to see this kind of level of opportunity, maybe this is someone that, Derek Carr just feels comfortable throwing the ball to. Zay Jones was that guy last year for Derek Carr. Someone that was completely off the radar, yet had a lot of target share based on the fact that there was just a comfortability with the quarterback position. This could be the guy going forward. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's start by talking about the tight end position. David Njoku is going to start us off. Listen, if David Njoku isn't already rostered by you, I would be surprised considering how much I praised him this offseason. It only took a couple weeks, but David Njoku finally stepped up to what I anticipated him to look like. Yes, he saw a high volume of targets, 10 targets, 9 catches, 89 yards and a receiving touchdown, over 19 fantasy points. That's a lot. But that all being mentioned, he's still playing 88+% of the offensive snaps every single week. He's going to get targets in favorable matchups. They take on the Atlanta Falcons this upcoming week. We saw Will Disley score some, points yesterday against that Atlanta Falcons defense. They've given up their fair share against tight ends. David Njoku, I know he's currently rostered in 50% of leagues, but if you're in desperate need of a tight end, could be a great option. Moving on to Tyler Conklin, another one of these players that has sneakily been one of the best tight ends in the league in terms of consistency thus far. Coming off of a week in which he had 80 receiving yards and 8 total receptions on 8 targets, over 12 fantasy points, takes on the Pittsburgh Steelers this upcoming week. Of course, we just saw David Njoku dominate against that defense. It's a matter of whether or not Zach Wilson is going to help Tyler Conklin get into that conversation, because Joe Flacco was certainly able to do so. But if Zach Wilson's not good enough, we could be in a little bit of trouble in that regard. Moving on to Robert Tonyan. Robert Tonyan had himself the most targets that he has seen all season. 7 targets, 6 catches, 37 yards against the Tampa Bay defense. Now he takes on the New England Patriots. Over the last 2 weeks, the New England Patriots have had Pat Freiermuth and Mark Andrews put up pretty good points against their defensive efforts. As of right now, considering how many injuries this entire Green Bay Packers offense has seen in terms of the wide receiver position, I'm anticipating Robert Tonyan to see more and more utilization. 29% rostered could be a good option going forward. Logan Thomas, though he had a very disappointing performance against the Philadelphia Eagles, he is still one of those tight ends who's currently rostered in 42% of leagues, who still deserves to get another chance going forward. Carson Wentz did not look good in the revenge game. We kind of anticipated that, considering all revenge game quarterbacks have not played well over the last couple years. Carson Wentz taking on his former team in the Philadelphia Eagles did not look very good at all. There's a reason why they only scored 2 points in that game. Nonetheless, Logan Thomas, give him another shot. Moving on. We have Hayden Hurst on a short week again. When T. Higgins goes down with an injury, other receiving threats have to step up within this offense. Hayden Hurst would be one of those guys. Besides Samaje Perine, besides Tyler Boyd, Hayden Hurst definitely is going to be involved in the Thursday night contest against the Miami Dolphins. Moving on to the final tight end I wanted to mention. Let's just take a flyer option here. If you are desperate enough to where Jelani Woods, the rookie tight end, is going to potentially be someone that you want to have on roster in maybe a deeper league, you can go ahead and do so. But he is still competing with 2 other tight ends. I know he scored 2 touchdowns this week. We're just mentioning him because if he continues to see red zone utilization, he could end up being a guy that continues to score touchdowns. We have seen Matt Ryan and his number 1 tight end over the last couple years when he was with the Atlanta Falcons, whether it was Hayden Hurst, whether it was Kyle Pitts, whether it was Austin Hooper, find success. It's just a matter of whether or not Jelani Woods has carved himself out a greater role going into future weeks outside of the red zone. Moving on to the quarterback position, Trevor Lawrence. Again, Trevor Lawrence played out of his mind on Sunday against that defense. A 72% passing completion percentage, takes on Philadelphia this week. He's rostered in more than 50% of leagues, but if he's available and you are in need of a quarterback, he could be a great option for you. Moving on to Ryan Tannehill. We expected Ryan Tannehill to play relatively well against that Vegas Raiders awful defense. There's a reason why we had him positioned in the same spot this time last week in our week 3 waiver wire conversation. Had himself a pretty good game, a rushing touchdown, a passing touchdown. We're expecting that offense to kind of trend in the right direction going forward. They take on Indianapolis. He played pretty well against them last year. I'm expecting to see the same as we continue into week 4. Moving on, we have Marcus Mariota taking on the Cleveland Browns this week. Again, Marcus Mariota is another one of these quarterbacks that has played well, has been able to get himself 200 plus passing yards each of the last couple of weeks, has been able to get himself 2 or more touchdowns every single week. The rushing upside isn't there in terms of yardage, considering Cordero Patterson has been so good on the ground. But as of right now, a quarterback that is getting himself in the mix of this top 16 conversation every week now is another guy that we should be considering as a potential play going forward. We have Jared Goff as our number 4. He takes on, a pretty soft defense like the Seattle Seahawks. I know he's going to be undermanned in terms of his offensive line, dealing with a couple injuries. The receiving core, isn't up to, the highest standard. DeAndre Swift missing is definitely going to hurt, and considering this is a run-first team, Jamal Williams is a vulture on the goal line. I'm still expecting Jared Goff to continue to play well and find success, especially in a favorable matchup. Moving on to Matt Ryan. I don't know if I technically trust Matt Ryan. I know he was able to play relatively well against the Kansas City Chiefs. But man, we're going to go ahead and we're going to keep him on a short leash. Maybe this is someone we pick up and in future weeks we're going to utilize him. But even against Tennessee's defense, I could very easily see Matt Ryan screwing this up, even though it should be an easy matchup considering how terribly that secondary is played. I could always see Matt Ryan messing this up. Hopefully Michael Pittman just continues to get his targets. Moving on to the final option I wanted to mention, it is Jacoby Brissett. Another one of these quarterbacks that is rostered in very few leagues. The only place that I see him being utilized is on my team in Superflex formats. If you play in a 2QB league, could be another one of these options you want to pick up roster. They have a pretty advantageous matchup going against the Falcons this upcoming week. If Geno Smith is able to have himself 2 touchdowns against that defense, why not Jacoby Brissett with the likes of Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, and David Njoku playing all as well as they currently are. Let's move on to our kicker and defensive conversation. A couple of these kickers, specifically Riley Patterson and Kaimi Fairbairn, both of them played extremely well in the last couple weeks and continue to do so in week 3. Riley Patterson in the last 3 contests, 12 fantasy points, 8 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, yet he is still only rostered in 1% of leagues. You guys didn't trust me last week? It's okay. Moving on, Kaimi Fairbairn, currently only rostered in 2% of leagues. Mentioned him last week. He scored 10, 11, and 8 fantasy points. A lot better than some of these other kickers who have played awful this season. The final kicker I wanted to mention is Graham Gano. I know he plays later tonight, but going into this upcoming week, they take on a pretty relatively easy matchup against Chicago. If Graham Gano is going to be involved in that matchup, currently only rostered in 7% of leagues, could be a decent option. The 3 defenses I wanted to mention this week. Number 1, the New York Giants. Again, like I mentioned, they take on the Chicago Bears. Justin Fields is just not relevant in that regard. And if, in fact, the New York Giants are able to stop the run in any sort of capacity or at least slow them down, they could very easily force Justin Fields to make mistakes, get him caught in that backfield. A lot of sacks, a lot of points via forced fumbles, interceptions. Could be racked up for the Giants. We talk about the Green Bay Packers. They take on probably Brian Hoyer this week. Mac Jones most likely not going to play. And then we have the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on Zach Wilson. We are targeting inexperienced or just really bad quarterbacks. And that's what we're going after in terms of this week's defenses. And that's going to cover it and finish off today's video for our Week 4 waiver wire targets for the 2022 fantasy football season. I want to thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Again, tonight we have a pick'ems play of going higher on the reception total of Shepard, Noah Brown, and Richie James. I'll go ahead and pop that up on the screen for you guys. So if you're interested, check that out. There's a link down in the description. When you use promo code Andrew today, when you sign up via Underdog Fantasy and make a first-time deposit, minimum of $10, you'll be giving a first-time deposit match up to $100. If you're interested, check that out. If you deposit 10, you'll get 10. If you deposit 50, you'll get 50, up to 100. So if you're interested, check that out. Otherwise, tomorrow, we'll be talking about the running back position for our Week 4 running back rankings. And until then, I'll see you guys. Peace.